revisiting the most controversial episode of The Simpsons. If you're a longtime Simpsons fan, I'm sure you already know exactly which episode I'm talking about. Or maybe you have it narrowed down to a few different ones. But let's play a little game, shall we? What percentage confidence do you have that you know which episode I'm about to talk about? Put the episode title, or if you don't know the episode title, the plot of the episode, and your confidence level in the comments. Go ahead, I'll wait. Alright, so maybe you're not sure. So, what I'm going to do to give you a hint is I'm going to quote some of the contemporaneous reviews of this episode from the Simpsons archive, and after that, I'll ask again. Okay, quote number 1 from Dale G. Abersold. This episode is certainly a waste of tape, abandoning all continuity and destroying a great supporting character in exchange for a few cheap laughs. Okay, quote number 2 from Jonathan Benny. This was notably bad. One of the distinguishing things about the show has always been the feeling that the writers had really lively minds, and that no matter what excesses they went to, they were applying a wide base of amusing thoughts and information. This was virtually absent here, and the really worrying bit was that no one even seemed to be trying. The result was poor in every respect, looking like it was put together in a couple hours. Okay, and the third quote from Ben Collins. I sincerely hope that we just saw the worst episode this season. There was no point to the story. I didn't particularly care about what was going on. Most gags were completely pointless, and even the more pointed ones failed miserably. This and the mindless, ridiculous ending almost striked it with a failing grade, if not for the Ralph Wiggum scenes at Bart's bad-mouthing of the situation. Okay, can I first state that the idea that the episode looked like it was put together in a couple of hours is absolute heresy? I mean, now that we've had 20 years of computer animated Simpsons, the older cel-shaded episodes of The Simpsons are nothing short of works of art. But that's besides the point. So let me ask you again. Which episode do you think I'm talking about, and how confident are you? Alright. Ready? Okay, I'm about to reveal the answer. If you said Season 9's The Principal and the Pauper, you were correct. This episode has been despised by fans since it originally aired on September 28th, 1997. The plot of this episode is that it turns out that Seymour Skinner, the principal of Springfield Elementary, a character who had been around since the very first episode, is revealed to actually be an imposter. It turns out that the man that we've known as Seymour Skinner was actually named Armin Tamzarian. He met the real Sergeant Seymour Skinner in the Army during the Vietnam War. When the real Sergeant Skinner was presumed dead, Armin Tamzarian went home to tell his mother, Agnes Skinner, in person. However, Agnes mistook Armin Tamzarian for her son, although it's highly implied that she knew he wasn't really her son, but that she reasoned that her son was likely dead and made a snap decision to declare Armin to be her son in order to save face and not have to deal with reality. So they both decide to go along with the lie until 26 years later, in this episode, when it's revealed to both the characters and to the audience that the real Sergeant Skinner is actually alive. At a special nighttime school assembly to celebrate the 20th anniversary of Principal Skinner working at Springfield Elementary, the real Seymour Skinner is in the back of a car heading home for the first time in 26 years, and he sees his name on the school sign. So he interrupts the assembly to declare that Armin is an imposter, and Armin, aka the man that we thought was Principal Skinner, confirms this to be true. Armin tells the story of why and how he assumed the identity of Seymour Skinner. At first, the townspeople lose all respect for Armin Tamzarian. The students no longer see him as a disciplinarian or authority figure, to the extent that they ever really did, since he committed the crime of fraud himself. Armin resigns from his job, and Superintendent Chalmers remarks that Armin Tamzarian's reign of terror is over, as he hires the real Seymour Skinner to be principal, reasoning that Seymour Skinner is qualified for the job, by virtue of the fact that a man pretending to be Seymour Skinner did the job for 20 years. At Quickie Mart, Armin doesn't know whether to sign his real name or the name he's been using for 26 years. Apu is nonplussed and tells him to call himself whatever he wants. However, Marge tells him, "To me, you're just a stranger, pretending to be something he's not." So Armin makes the decision to leave Springfield and return to his native capital city. Edna, Mrs. Krabappel, begs him to stay, as she still loves him in spite of learning his true identity. However, he leaves, uncharacteristically cursing at Bart and his friends as he speeds away on his motorcycle. With Armin having fled, Lisa is actually the first one to stick up for him, and she says that a rose by any other name would smell as sweet. Agnes also starts to realize that she misses Armin because the real Seymour Skinner refuses to take orders from her. Unlike Armin, the real Skinner does not behave like a 10-year-old who has to do chores and come straight home after school. So the Simpsons drive Edna and Agnes to Capital City to get Armin to return to Springfield. Armin is reluctant, but finds he cannot resist when Agnes commands him to return to Springfield. Upon coming home, the town is ready to accept Armin back, but the real Seymour Skinner is not willing to leave. So the townspeople tie the real Skinner to a chair on the back of a train in order to kick him out of town. In the end, Judge Snyder grants Armin the name Seymour Skinner along with his past, present, future, and mother. He also declares that everything shall be just as it was before, and nobody will ever mention it again. The crowd cheers. Armin, who is now legally known as Seymour Skinner, tells the people of Springfield that the experience has humbled and changed him, that he's now resolved not to be so rigid going forward. From now on, you're going to see a new Seymour Skinner, he promises. But Agnes quickly shoots this down, saying, "Oh no, we won't." So this episode was immediately controversial. I thought it would be interesting, so I went back and checked what people were posting on alt.tv.simpsons in the days immediately after it aired. So just a little background. If you don't know what Usenet is, Usenet was basically the internet before the World Wide Web existed. So you couldn't go on websites, like you couldn't go to www.google.com, but there was like in your email, there was like, it was sort of like a primitive message board, and they had all these different groups. So most of them started with alt, but there's a bunch of different ones. And it actually still exists today, but I don't think anybody still posts there, but I could be. But anyway, alt.tv.simpsons was the Usenet group for The Simpsons. So that's back in the day where all of like the internet savvy Simpsons fans discussed the show. And they used to call them OFF, which means our favorite family. So one of the biggest complaints on alt.tv.simpsons in the days immediately after it aired was that the episode messed with continuity. So I want to address that complaint because it's total bunk. The show has always had flexible continuity. You know, by this point, Bart had been 10 years old for 9 seasons. He had almost been held back a grade at the end of season 2, but then Mrs. Krabappel passed him at the last second. But then in season 3, she's still his teacher. So I didn't see anyone complaining about that. In fact, it's a beloved episode. So with The Simpsons, suspending disbelief had never been optional. I also want to point out that the idea that the episode was universally condemned is a myth. I was surprised to find that a lot of posters on alt.tv.simpsons kept saying things along the lines of, "Duh, it's a cartoon." So I think it's important to remember that just because one group of people is extremely vocal, that doesn't mean that their opinion is universal. Actually, there was quite a large contingent on alt.tv.simpsons that was making fun of the people who declared every single episode to be the worst episode ever. So, I mean, although Comic Book Guy on the show is a great character, he by no means represents every fan who frequented alt.tv.simpsons in that era. Another surprising thing to me, perhaps lost to history, is that Armin Tamzarian himself posted on alt.tv.simpsons the day after the episode aired, stating that he wanted to contact Fox, but they had no email address. Oh, 1997. So, I've said that the roasting of this episode was not universal in 1997, but there were a lot of people who disliked it, and its reputation only got worse as the years went on. So one of the reviews that I saw, and I think this was also on the Simpsons archive, but I saw it on alt.tv.simpsons as well, was from Andre Lombard, who said, "Someone needs to tie Ken Keeler to a chair and have him trained out of town." So Ken Keeler, the episode's writer, said when he made the DVD commentary for this episode that the episode is about a community of people who like things just the way they are. Skinner's not really close to these people, you know? He's a minor character. But they get upset when someone comes in and says, "This is not really the way things are." And they run the messenger out of town on the rail. When the episode aired, lo and behold, a community of people who like things just the way they are got mad. It never seems to have occurred to anyone that this episode is about the people who hate it. Okay. So it's kind of interesting to read so much hatred was directed at Keeler for this episode, especially because he went on to become such a beloved writer of Futurama, and he wrote some of the show's very best episodes, including 4 episodes which were intended to serve as series finales for that show. He is the kind of writer who is able to mix humor with a larger overall message. And that has always, from day one, been the Simpsons formula, right? Satire of, 90s American culture that has a larger message beyond what we're seeing on our screen. I also want to dispel a myth about this episode. People call this episode the beginning of the end, and they attribute that to Mike Scully. Mike Scully is somebody who became the executive producer of The Simpsons in season 9. And a lot of people, not myself personally, but a lot of people really blame him for the decline in the show's quality. So this episode was actually a holdover from season 8's production run, and it was not executive produced by Mike Scully. So if you're trying to craft the narrative that Mike Scully wrote The Simpsons, you can't really point at this episode. So knowing that it's a holdover from the season 8 production run, I think it's really interesting to compare the episode with season 8's brilliant episode, The Itchy and Scratchy Poochie Show. In that episode, network executives attempt to jumpstart the Itchy and Scratchy show, which is getting stale, by introducing the character of Poochie the dog. But unlike the classic characters of Itchy and Scratchy, Poochie is basically designed by committee at the orders of network executives who are interested in making it money and not offending anybody, not in creating art. So the character of Poochie, who has the paradoxical description of being a kung fu hippie from Gangsta City, is intended by the soulless network execs to be everything to everyone. And instead, he ends up being nothing to anyone. That episode, which contained the first utterance of Comic Book Guy's worst episode ever catchphrase, clearly had an underlying message. The online Simpsons community, which was censored at that time on alt.tv.simpsons, had been increasingly critical of The Simpsons since at least season 5. Bart commented to the Comic Book Guide that episode, "They've given you thousands of hours of entertainment for free. What could they possibly owe you? I mean, if anything, you owe them." That was clearly the creative team of The Simpsons speaking through the character of Bart to the critical internet fans. So it is kind of funny because nowadays people say, "Oh, The Simpsons, the first 8 to 9 seasons were great and then it went downhill." But if you look back at alt.tv.simpsons, they're already starting to say that around season 5. They're already saying, "Oh, seasons 1 to 4 were great, and now it's starting to get stupid." So it's all a matter of perspective, right? Anyway, I always think that's interesting when you go back and read what people were actually writing at the time it was coming out. back then, they thought 1 to 4 was the glory days and that the glory days had already passed. Or some people thought that anyway. I don't want to say it was universal because, just because the loudest people are complaining, that doesn't mean that everybody was. Anyway, so the Principal and the Pauper, like the Itchy and Scratchy and Poochie show, has a deeper message. So just how the Itchy and Scratchy and Poochie show was a thinly veiled response to criticism of The Simpsons, the Principal and the Pauper serves as a polemic, questioning the need for sitcoms, cartoons, and even society itself to always place the status quo on such a pedestal. The characters in this episode are terrified of an upset to the status quo, so much so that they all gleefully agree to feign ignorance in perpetuity at the end of the episode. It's ironic, as Ken Keeler himself pointed out, that much of the fan base had the exact same reaction to this episode that the characters had to learning that Skinner was really Armin Tamzarian. And as Lisa points out, nothing has really actually changed. Whether his name is Seymour Skinner or Armin Tamzarian, he's the exact same weenie as he always was. Why was he qualified to be principal yesterday when the townspeople thought his name was Seymour, and not today, now that they know his name is Armin? Similarly, why was he a beloved character to the audience yesterday when his name was Seymour, but ruined forever now that his name is Armin? This episode is such an excellent criticism of status quo is king. In addition to that, it's also a terrific setup of conformity. When Lisa states Armin Tamzarian pulled himself off the streets and earned our respect and admiration, Bart lazily replies, he lied about his name. How is that an argument against what Lisa said? How does lying about his name change the fact that he's been a good principal for 20 years? But the entire town decides that Armin Tamzarian is a non-starter, so everyone just goes along with it. Similarly, when the town sours on the real Seymour Skinner, everyone instantly conforms to the idea of accepting Armin back. In the end, they even cheer when Judge Snyder declares that nobody shall ever mention the events of the episode again, under penalty of torture. It just shows that none of the townspeople ever really cared that much about Armin Tamzarian fraudulently assuming Skinner's identity. They just didn't want to have to think that hard about anything. And Judge Snyder gives everyone an excuse to turn off their brains and continue acting like nothing ever happened. So I've stated why I find the episode to be good satire of conformity and society's bizarre tendency to worship the status quo. Now the question is this episode actually funny? And I would say yes, this episode is very funny. Any episode with Principal Skinner as the main character is going to be pretty funny right off the bat. The way he relates to his mother, constantly taking her orders as if he's a small child, and the way that he relates to Superintendent Chalmers, who finds him to be obnoxiously uptight, is on perfect display in this episode. Plus, the name Armin Tamzarian is itself a hilarious name. In the DVD commentary of the episode, the name is actually revealed to be based on a real person, which actually could have caused problems because it's a rare name. It's like a one of a kind name. And they explained in the commentary that in order to use a name, it has to be either so rare that nobody has it or so common that a lot of people have it. And I think I can't remember because it's been a while since I watched the commentary, but I think they said there were 3 Armin Tamzarians in the entire country. So that really put them at risk for a lawsuit. Luckily, the real Armin Tamzarian, aside from being confused as to why he was suddenly on The Simpsons, and as I mentioned before, he posted on alt.tv.simpsons the day after the episode aired. Luckily, he did not raise any legal objections to this episode, but it seems unlikely that if they tried to get a name like that through nowadays, that they'd have been able to get it past their legal department. A unique thing in this episode is that the real Skinner actually calls Mrs. Crabapple Crabapple, And I can't remember if any other character ever calls her that, despite it seemingly being such an obvious joke to make. I love how at the assembly they have the students sing a song about Skinner, and it goes, "They call him Skinner, Skinner, faster than lightning." Can I just say that I was in elementary school when this episode aired, and we also had a song about our principal that we sang at every single assembly. Murphy is our principal, invincible. If you know, you know. Overall, I wouldn't consider this to be one of the best episodes of The Simpsons, but it is a good episode. The plot was really interesting, and there were plenty of funny jokes. So if you've been poisoned by the popular opinion of this episode, maybe it's time to give it a second look. What do you think of this episode? Let me know in the comments.